I'm Mr. MegaManFan, and if you like what we do on this channel, please subscribe, give a thumbs up, and leave a comment below. Thanks, it's always appreciated. This week I'm going over some of the new items I picked up for Super Famicom and Super Nintendo on Retro Hunting Adventures, starting with Ken Griffey Jr. Presents Major League Baseball, which is a game I picked up strictly because I already had the instruction manual for it. No joke, I decided I could get at least 1/3 of the way towards a complete in-box copy and picked up the cartridge when I saw it was available for a few bucks. There's no shortage of games available for multiple retro consoles that feature the likeness and or license of Ken Griffey Jr., including another one for Super Nintendo, which is why it's easy to confuse Ken Griffey Jr. Presents Major League Baseball with other titles like Ken Griffey Jr.'s Winning Run. So you may think you have one when in fact you have the other. But let's move on to the next game on my list. And this one is a Japanese exclusive from Chunsoft, and it's called Banshees Last Cry. Now, I suppose to be fair, I should put an asterisk next to Japanese exclusive because an iOS port localized to English was made in 2014, but before that, this was only available on Super Famicom with a later port to the PlayStation, but at least we know that a localized English version does exist. From what I gather reading about this game online, it falls somewhere between a graphic novel and a murder mystery where you're trying to figure out who killed who and why. So I'm going to definitely get this one in a localized form, patch it or whatnot. Yes, Ryan, I've already taken care of that. No need to look. Don't worry about it. But it does seem like a fun game, especially considering it only cost me $1.07. It's one of those times where you just got to take advantage of a good opportunity when you see it. So I definitely did. Although I had to change the name when I dumped it because I'm never going to remember that this is Banshees Last Cry with that original title. So if necessary, I'll change it back to patch it. But I would assume most IPS software can handle the fact that if you give it a ROM and you give it the patch, it can still put two and two together, even if you don't keep the file name that you dumped it with. But I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, and I'll be the first to admit when I'm wrong about something. But in this case, I have a feeling it will be fine. Moving on, we've got Lethal Enforcers, which for some reason I assumed was going to be a Super Scope 6 game, and that I was going to have to get out that giant bazooka to play it, which could be a problem because I've tried it with two different sensors on a CRT, and both times the sensors failed, so I think the actual Super Scope 6 itself is at fault, and not the different sensors that I've gotten. So I need a new Super Scope 6, and was not prepared to play it this way, but after a little testing of the game, I discovered you can use the D-pad as the crosshairs, so no light gun or Super Scope or anything else required. I'm pretty sure, though, that somewhere in my collection I've got a Sega Genesis version of this exact same game that came bundled with a light gun called the Justifier. And to play that, I would definitely have to hook up my old Sega Genesis to a CRT, because if I'm playing it through the Analog Mega SG on a flat screen LCD, that's obviously not going to work. The light sensors need to flash off a cathode ray tube in these kind of games, so if I want to play it with a light gun, I'll play it on the original Sega Genesis. I'll hook that back up to my CRT, which currently has a Super Nintendo, a Sega Master System, an Atari 7800, and a few other things hooked up to it, but a Genesis is not currently one of them. But happily, this one was easy to dump and easy to play without getting out a light gun, so I can play it on the Analog Super NT no problemo. Let's move on to the next game that I picked up, which is a release by Quest. Hello, Quest. It's good to see you. We are going on a quest with Quest. And what are we questing for? Ogre Battle, March of the Black Queen. Ryan already asked me about it, and yes, Ryan, there is a patch for this to English. Most of these long-running series games, these tactics games, these turn-based strategy games, if they've had multiple iterations over the lifespan of the series, then somebody has localized them to English. So not to worry on that score. I knew this going in, and this was another one that was only like $1.07. Prices have gone up ever so slightly from Japan for you, but 7 cents for a loose Super Famicom game is not too much to pay more than paying $1 for them back before current global situation that we're all dealing with. I almost said the P word, but I know the P word is a no-no on YouTube, so let's just assume everybody knows what word I'm referring to when I say the P word, and we'll call it the current global situation instead. This one was weird because normally you get some sort of title in the ROM header when you dump these, but there was none whatsoever, so I didn't feel like typing out the entire sentence, March of the Black Queen. I just shortened it to an abbreviation and figured that was good enough for me. I would remember what it stood for. Let's get back to Super Nintendo games, though, and this one I found at Half Price Books, and it was an anomaly because, one, it was locked away in a glass case, two, it was hidden behind another game where the guy who pulled it out of the glass case was like, I can't even believe you could see the title of that. Well, I knew what I was looking for, that's why I recognized it. And third, it was priced next to another game that was also $15. And it apparently occurred to the person pricing them. They were like, oh, Super Nintendo games are $15. Stick, 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 with one of those pricing guns. Well, $15 was way too much for the game next to it because it was super common, but it was actually underneath the price charting average for Phantom 2040. So I was like, you know what? I'll take it. That's a bargain at that price. And I have a 10% discount thanks to my wife anyway, so I actually got it for $13.50 before tax. You've probably seen me play Phantom 2040 on Genesis Does, but it was time to try out another version of the game and see how it compares and enjoy it in this new form. So I think that's not a bad way to go when you get a bargain, when you get a game for less than it averages on eBay, and when somebody's just being lazy and pricing everything the exact same way. They may go too high on 9 out of 10 things, but the one they go lower than the average, you can pick it up. Next is another pair of Super Famicom games that I picked up for $1.07 each, Crayon Shinchan 1 and Crayon Shinchan 2. Now, the rub of these games, no pun intended on having to rub the crayon off the walls that he just drew, is that a lot of the jokes around Shinchan are supposedly untranslatable, that Japanese audiences understand the local references and the cultural humor, and that Western audiences outside of Japan would not understand them. I defy that expectation because I've heard the same thing about a lot of anime over the years, and I found that things that are heavily local or regional to Japan can be understood with minimal effort if you look a few things up, and if you're already familiar with some other things from anime or video games, it's not that hard to understand. So from my perspective, I'm going to try both of these Crayon Shinchan games and see if they're really that difficult to understand. And I don't think that's the case. Just watching the opening cutscenes for both of these games, it seems pretty clear that in both cases, Crayon Shinchan is about a mischievous boy who's up to no good. And in the second one, it appears that he has to save the world from an alien invasion while still being an impetuous, spoiled child who will do whatever he wants and say whatever he wants, but now has to deal with an alien invasion on top of that. So wackiness abounds, which is what I understand the manga and the anime series are about too. It's the wacky misadventures of Shinchan and his friends. So who wouldn't want to play a video game like that? especially this sequel, which, like I said, seems to feature some sort of alien invader and his alien invasion army, and he's specifically targeting Shinchan and his family and friends. Who knows what his nefarious plot is, but these kind of random things happen in Japanese anime all the time. I mean, just watch Cromartie High, and you'll get a sense of what I mean, because in their classroom is a gorilla and a talking robot, and everybody just assumes that's normal. That's not normal! No way! But it's just accepted as part and parcel of the show, so I'm sure an alien army invading the world of Shinchan is pretty much status quo for the show. I'm not going to assume it's not. Switching back again to Super Nintendo games, we've got the Laughing Joking Numbnuts, otherwise known as LJN. And this, like Ken Griffey Jr. Presents Major League Baseball, was one I had to do a double take on because games with similar names are not the same. There is a Terminator 2 arcade game, but there's also a Terminator 2 based on the movie game. And when I had Terminator 2 on my list of games that I owned, it was T2 the arcade game and not Terminator 2 the movie. What's even funnier is when you dump this cartridge, the ROM header actually says Terminator 2 the movie. Don't take my word for it. Look here for yourself. Terminator 2 the movie. So if you had any doubt these weren't the same game, now you know the difference. And thankfully, so did I, because I had a feeling that just because I had Terminator 2 on my list didn't mean I had this. And I was right. I don't know if this will hold up to the arcade game, because T2, the arcade game, one of my all-time favorite arcade games, home ports have never quite held up to it. Mostly because you don't get that same sense of firing the machine gun that you do playing the arcade game, where you get actual force feedback. It's brilliant. So, here's Street Fighter 2, another game that was only $1.07. And this one gives me a complete in-box game because I already had the instruction manual and the box. Now, I know some purists will decry this because they'll say, well, you don't have the North American cartridge in the box. And you know what? So what? It plays exactly the same way as the North American Street Fighter 2. If there's a difference, I'm not noticing it. I'll have to go to a site like Cutting Room Floor, or watch a video by She Says or Stop Skeletons from Fighting. Maybe they've found some differences in the fighting styles or the gameplay, but when I'm doing the same 1,000 E Honda punches, cha 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 cha, then I can't tell any difference between this version and the North American version. It seems exactly the same to me. Street Fighter 2 is one of those games that I never feel like gets old. I mean, it gets old in a technical sense because it's 30 years old now, but it doesn't get old to play. The game never stops being fun to me, and it's almost as much fun, if not more fun, if you're playing it head-to-head with a friend. So, $1.07, you cannot go wrong, especially when you compare it to the price that the North American copy goes for, which is never less than $10. Sometimes well more if you get somebody that's greedy because they know Street Fighter 2 is a popular game, but it really shouldn't be more than $10 because it's sold like gangbusters and there's millions of copies of it out there, which is also why it's so cheap to import it from Japan. If you're bundling an order, throw in a copy of Street Fighter 2 for $1. It's totally worth it. We'll switch back to North American games for a moment, though. This one is from Traveler's Tales and Psygnosis. And what could they have up their sleeve that I would want on a Super Nintendo cartridge? Well, as it turns out, they've got Toy Story from the Walt Disney Company. And this is another one where, at the price, it was very hard to turn down. It was under $10, had a very nice label, and it was an authentic Super Nintendo card. It had the correct fonts and date and time stamp with the punched letters, where they press in whatever printing process they use. It leaves a little indentation in the label. You can read the letters if you turn it in the light, you'll see them and you'll know that it's an authentic Super Nintendo cart, because most of the people making reproduction labels or fake cartridges aren't going to that kind of trouble. So, not that I needed to be that scrupulous about Toy Story since it's a common game and fairly cheap, but you should look at all Super Nintendo cartridges you buy just to be on the safe side, because you never know when somebody, either accidentally or on purpose, might slip a fake in there somewhere. And the more expensive it is, the more scrupulous you should be. If you're paying for a copy of Chrono Trigger, ask them to open the cartridge and show you the board. And if they're not willing to do that, don't pay for it. I'm just being real about that here. I'm not telling you that people are liars and con artists, but I'm telling you that you need to protect yourself when you're going to spend a big ticket amount of money on a very highly sought after game like Earthbound or Final Fantasy. Just don't make the mistake of assuming it's real and then getting home and opening it up yourself and finding out you paid for something that you paid way more for than you should have. Because if you wanted to pay for a reproduction, you could get that way cheaper. Anyway, SimCity. You probably already noticed while I was going on and on that I put in SimCity to test it and dump it. This was another game that was $1.07. And I thought, why not? I bought SimCity Junior the last time I imported Super Famicom games. So now I have its adult counterpart. I have both games, SimCity and SimCity Junior. And I actually have a complete Super Famicom copy of Sim Earth. So I've acquired quite a few Japanese Maxis games. Sim this, Sim that. I don't believe there's a Sim Ant for Super Famicom. Maybe there is for Sega Saturn or PlayStation Import, or maybe there is for a local console here, but I think that was exclusive to PC computers. I'd like to go back and play that again, though. I think Sim Ant was pretty cool. And now we switch from Super Famicom back to Super Nintendo again with Tony Miola's sidekick Soccer. Yeah, I didn't know who Tony Miola was because I don't follow soccer that closely, or football, depending on where you live, but I looked him up and he's a player of some repute. He won quite a few different championships with different teams, played for some professional teams in the United States, and I guess on that basis he would be very worthy to license a game under his name. Although, when it comes to famous soccer players, I think of Bend It Like Beckham or Pele. Tony Miola is not the first name that comes to mind, but maybe that was why they chose Tony Miola, because he was probably cheaper to license than somebody like David Beckham or Pele. Last but not least today on games that I picked up on Retro Hunting Adventures is Yu Hakusho 2, which was a simple choice because I already had Yu Hakusho, and I didn't spend any more on that one than I did on this one, which was $1 and change. And it's not a game where you even need to worry about localizing it. You could if you wanted to, but it's a fighting game. Yu Hakusho has to battle his way through all these different characters, so don't worry about knowing whether or not you can understand the Japanese text. You'll be able to play it regardless. I'm Mr. MegaManFan. This has been the Retro Hunting Adventures, and as always, I thank you for watching, subscribing, liking, and commenting. If you want to see any more in-depth gameplay footage of any one of these specific games, just leave a comment below, and I'll feature it in greater depth in a future video. But bye for now.